Sir, could you put that mask on, please? No. I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. And Bill, this is a conversation that is happening now across the country in retail establishments, restaurants, and other kinds of places where either state laws or local laws have required the wearing of masks when in public accommodations or places of business. And in some cases, simply store policies have mandated that. Stores that wish to remain open are trying to find ways to live within the guidelines recommended by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. But Bill, the natural spirit of liberty that springs up in the breast of every red-blooded American man has tended, in some cases, to reject this guidance. I have a friend who recently told me that when he asked the customer to put on his mask in accordance with state law and store policy, the guy said that he had a concealed carry license, and what are you going to do about it? Bill, just as a law and order man.
Can we name a state after that guy? Wow.
As a law and order man, do you think that this is the appropriate reaction to something that poor, probably $12 to $15 an hour store clerk has to do as part of the conditions of his employment and under the rubric of state law?
I'm not doing this under any perceived pressure from censorship or anything else. I'm just doing it so that I don't want to be misunderstood or quoted out of context, as is often the case with conservatives. Let me just say before we begin this, that COVID-19 is in fact a real thing, and it's killed a couple 100,000 people or Americans, or is likely to. And that's that. Now, the one thing I get out of this from this gentleman's reaction and from just the general reaction of Americans everywhere, New Yorkers, for example, found themselves quite amazed when they were getting ticketed. Their restaurants and bars were getting ticketed for having people drinking outside or just around, the premises without masks, when just the day before 10,000 people without masks walked by in the Black Lives Matter protest. So on one hand, there's the official statement, and then there's what the government will allow the people to do if they think that there's a priority higher than basically destroying the economy. But the big issue here, Scott, is this. The news media and the medical experts, along with nanny state politicians, not all politicians, but quite a few of them, have decided long ago, long before this pandemic, that the American people are children and they're too stupid to understand dangers and real threats. And if we give them actual information, one of two things will happen. Either they won't act on a real warning, in which case they'll all get killed, or they'll overreact and start injecting Lysol into their veins because the president mentioned there's some kind of an internal disinfectant that we could use. Turns out they're working on something like that. But in any event, this is what the elites think of us. And that's why when you look at all of this stuff that's been going on, Barack Obama's election was a triumph of the left liberal elite who thinks that they're extremely smart and, in point of fact, are not so smart. Donald Trump was a counter-revolution against this takeover attempt. And so it is so deeply ingrained in politicians and journalists now, they're completely unaware of it. But they are utterly convinced. They know what's better for us than we do. And therefore, the ability to say, well, we're just doing this to save lives, gives them a moral fig leaf in which to cover their desire to control people. And the best example of this recently, just pointed out to me by my friend Phil, not just yesterday, was that there was a number of medical doctors got together in a sort of a meeting sponsored by Tea Party patriots, medical doctors on the front lines, not research scientists, not statisticians. And they talked about the true nature of COVID, and it was pulled down from YouTube and Facebook within 6-7 hours for spreading false information. So some guy who's a 22-year-old who may have a background in either political science or computer studies, because we know he doesn't have a background in computer science, decided that this was false information, removed it from the only way really to see it, made an editorial decision, by the way, on the part of being a so-called carrier. But beyond all of this, what it comes down to is some 20-something guy with the full support of his board of directors at Google, has been empowered to determine what the American people can and cannot handle because he will decide whether or not we can handle it. Please forgive me for running on this one answer, but
I was going to say, Bill, that's a broad sweeping statement about this, but I live in bright red, God bless Texas, and the governor of this state and his entire administration are all Republicans and mostly conservatives, and they have implemented this mask restriction. But even if they hadn't, and a store's policy was just, hey, we're concerned about the health and safety of our employees and our customers, and please wear your mask in the store. It is, and an employee says something to a customer about it. What kind of person says, no, I'm not going to respect that, and I'm going to stay in your store?
Well, a person who's probably pretty damn tired of being told what to do and being treated like a child. I'm not really dismissing the behavior. To be honest with you, if we want to come back to our big coloring book of ethics, if he doesn't like the store policy, he can go shop somewhere else. But that kind of rebellious reaction is what happens when people who are adults who are used to making decisions on their own lives have been treated like children and treated by children by people who have the coercive force of law behind them. And that is getting pretty old across the country.
You seem to be excusing this kind of behavior that basically says, I am the measure of the law. And in addition to that, when I'm on your private property, in your business, I get to decide what your store policies is going to be with regard to me. And if you give me a hard time about it, I'm going to create a dust up here and possibly even threats of physical violence.
As I said, according to the Bill's Big Coloring Book of Ethics, if the guy doesn't like the store policy, he can go shop at another store. If the threat became overt, like if you try to get me out of here for not wearing a mask, I'll shoot you, then the man needs to be he needs to be arrested because he's intimidating people on private property. The man with the gun, the customer has no right to determine what the policy of the store is. If he doesn't like it, he can go somewhere else. But what he's reacting to is not the policy of the store. He's reacting to being told what to do by people who obviously can't make up their minds, who are contradicting themselves every single week, or at least they were in the early stages of this, based on a computer model made by one far left winger who assumed that 87% of the population was going to catch the disease, when in 1819 pandemic, it was 27% of the population that caused it. And so his reaction is the reaction that many of us feel because we're just sick and tired, and we've had enough of being told what to do. And Scott, this is the thing. This is the thing. It has been so arbitrary and so idiosyncratic on the part of every single person. Gavin Newsom has decided this. Well, this person has decided that. And guess what? If you live on one side of the line or the other side of the line, you either stay in business or you don't. And the one thing that the government has not done, any level of the government has done, has been to say, here's where the threat is relative to these other threats in our lives. Here's how many people died of heart disease since January. Some people died of COVID. No one has said that. No one has said whether we're succeeding or not. No one has told us how much we're succeeding by. And most importantly of all, and this is the whole thing right here, there has never been, and intentionally never been, a target, a definable target that could be reached, because these people, as a general rule, love power. And this same thing, by the way, applies to the reparations movement. You'll notice that when people, and I'm just using this as an example, but when people talk about reparations for slavery, they never talk about what those reparations are. In other words, no one's ever come out and said, hey, we were mistreated as slaves and blah, 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 and we want $400,000 a person. And the reason that they never tell you what they want is because if they tell you what they want, it's possible they might get it. And then they're out of luck. So there has never been any goalposts. Forget moving the goalposts. There haven't been any goalposts for when we can ease these restrictions. And as I said to my wife in Santa Monica 2-3 months ago now, walking down the street with masks on, I said, honey, they're never gonna they're never going to say it's okay to take the masks off. You
Bill,
know that,
again,
right?
I think you're kind of equivocating on this because you'll spend 7 or 8 seconds talking about how people ought to be polite and leave a store where they disagree with the policies. And then you'll go on for 7 minutes about how you can fully understand why this person would want to break the law. But you're a conservative, Bill, and conservatives believe in law and order. You don't, when we're talking about the riots in the streets related to the George Floyd killing, you don't say, well, when that guy doesn't immediately obey an order to disperse by the police, I can fully understand why he thinks that way, because after all, his people have been subjected to police brutality and shakedowns for many decades, and historically, he's got a good reason, but yet he probably should politely disperse. You have a completely different tone when it comes to obeying the law for one versus the other.
You think you got me, don't you?
I'm just asking.
Yeah. What legal statute prevents people, requires people to wear a mask on the property of that store?
Well, in this case, the executive order of the duly elected governor of a state.
The executive order is the kind of thing that's used to increase the staff of a governor's PR department.
So challenge it in
anyway.
court and do it the constitutional way rather than suggesting that people might be fully you could sympathize with somebody who'd want to break the law.
Yes, I've always said I would sympathize with people who in fact, my entire idea of philosophy of government is that people are not required to obey laws that either are oppressive, immoral, not followed by the people that wrote the laws. In many other cases, there are natural laws, Scott. There are laws above the laws of man. And the problem here is that in the early stages of this, virtually everybody agreed it was a crisis, and we all basically went along. And then we realized, no, they're going to keep doing this forever. And the reason is because we have a blinding loophole in how this country is governed in terms of our rights. And we have learned this lesson. If we learn anything from this pandemic, this is what we've learned. There is a blind spot in our constitutional protection, and that blind spot is called emergency powers. And those emergency powers have never been defined, but much, much, much more importantly, the nature of emergency has never been defined. In other words, there has never been, prior to an event, codified, discussed, voted upon, agreed upon standards of what constitutes an emergency, number one. And number two, if those conditions are met, what is the appropriate power of the governor or the president or the mayor or whatever, and how long do those powers last? And we've never had a definition.
That's legal speculation, Bill, but the law is the law until it is found to not be the law. And the problem, I think, that is coming down to this one, it's one thing for a police officer to go up to a guy and say, sir, you're in breach of the law. We need to have you put that mask on, or you're going to be arrested or fined or cited or whatever it is that they do as a result of that. But you're not doing it with police officers. You're expecting not store owners, but store clerks, for example. Those are the frontline people who are making a relatively modest income.
Scott, you're
expecting them to ask people
treating
to
this
obey
story.
the law.
You're treating this story like I'm the guy that went into the store. You're making this about me, like I'm defending this guy, like I'm the guy who did it. And what are you going to do about it? I'm not the guy who did it.
I'm just saying,
I had nothing to do with it.
How do the store clerks deal with this
it.
when somebody says, no, I'm not going to do that? If you're a store clerk, you're making $13 an hour, and you ask them politely to put their mask on, your store management has told you, do not get into a confrontation. Stores always say that.
When did I disagree with this?
So you say that. He resists you.
The clerk should have called the police.
What do you do at that point?
You call the police. You call the police. This man with the concealed carry permit is not entitled to come onto somebody else's property and violate store policies regarding littering or no admission without shoes or shirts for that matter. He has no right to do that. The clerk should call the police. I agree that the guy has a right to definitely disagree with what's going on politically, but he doesn't have the right to do that on private property. I've never suggested that was the case. So stop putting words in my mouth.
So let's take the gun out of the equation, because that's not what happens most of the time. Most of the time, it's just people who say one of two things. number one is they go off on a tirade about how these masks are a waste of time and that it's government power and all that kind of stuff. And number two, they just simply say, well, I have a health condition and I can't wear this mask. And that is an exception if you have a health condition. But it's kind of like, what do they call service dogs? Once you let service dogs into a store, everybody who has a dog brings his dog into the store.
Yeah, I can't wear a mask because I have a pre-existing health condition, which is I'm positive for COVID-19. Look, we just did a right angle. We shot it yesterday. I don't know if it's out yet or not, where we talked about a company owner who required his employees to sign a document saying that they legally, affirm that they are not COVID-19 positive,
or that they don't have any of the symptoms. That episode will come out later this week.
Okay. So we all agreed that that was a reprehensible thing for the guy to do. But my position, and I think generally the position was, and the only reason I defend reprehensible actions sometimes is because the remedy is always much worse. It's his business. It's his private property. He's paying people. If he wants you to require you to wear purple shoes to work, in my opinion, it's not the opinion of the state of California, certainly, but in my opinion, as the owner of that business, he has the right to say whatever the hell he wants to. The owners of that store have the right to say, we would like you to wear masks. If you're not wearing a mask, you can't come in, whether the government backs that idea or not. As a matter of fact, 5 years from now, if that retail store wants to continue that policy of mask wearing, they have every single right to do that. And somebody who doesn't wear a mask 5 years from now, after we get a vaccine for all of this stuff, if somebody doesn't wear a mask, then the employee still has the right to call the police because these people are violating the policies of the private property that they're on that makes them trespassers. So there's nothing too difficult to think about here in terms of that particular case. But what the guy with the concealed permit basically is saying, he's the bleeding edge, and he's wrong in this case. But what he is saying is, I am tired of being treated like a child and an idiot by children and idiots. And this is a legitimate, genuine concern. And this is why he and more Americans are refusing to wear masks. Now,
and he's telling that to some kid in a polo shirt with a name badge.
Can we please get over this? Can we please get over the kid with the polo shirt stuff? I'm on his side. Okay, I'm on his side. He's just a kid, and he's doing what the store policy is, and it doesn't matter what the policy is regard to masks or COVID. His job is to enforce store policy. If somebody makes a veiled threat towards him, then that person needs to be removed from the premises by law enforcement. Period. That's it. So enough of that kid. Now the question is, does this guy have the right to not wear a mask in public? That's the question. That's the much bigger, better question. And in my mind, this is where the real fight actually is and should be. If he was wearing look, California beaches are still closed down because God knows if there's one place where you're going to get aerosolized particles into your nostrils, it's standing on the boundary of 6,000 miles of ocean coming ashore at 50 miles an hour.
Got to watch out for those Japanese germs.
You better believe it, man. So that's the issue. And again, the issue comes down to this. Are you a law and order guy? Yes, I am. I am a law and order person. I believe in law and order. I believe in following the law. And I believe if it's a bad law, it needs to be changed. But we're not talking about laws here. We're talking about individual, rather capricious, certainly arbitrary actions on the part of government officials who are elected, who are not paying any attention. There's no feedback, Scott. There's no feedback from the people to the politicians on this one, which is why I think clearly in the future, if we want to maintain our freedom in any kind of a crisis situation, we'd better do something like, here is the definition of an emergency. The person who will be able to use emergency powers, governor, mayor, president, whatever, will be entitled to use those powers for 10 days, at which point they automatically expire unless renewed for another 10 days by an act of the legislature. And will continue under those circumstances until the point where the legislature says, no, we're no longer going to continue this. Then the people have some say in how their lives are being run. But this executive order thing, which Donald Trump is guilty of, but Barack Obama turned it into a science. Executive order is dictating. It's a dictation. It is, I have decreed. When the California website came out on COVID-19, I looked at it a month and a half ago. I just wanted to smash the screen. Here's a date, it's like on May 22nd. Governor Gavin Newsom has decided that Californians will be able to vote in November. Oh, really? Yes, in fact, it was even clearer than that, has issued an executive order of making it clear that voters will be allowed to vote in the presidential election in November. This was in April or May, maybe. Who do these people think they are? I mean, I know who they think they are, but why do we tolerate this from them? If we were given the statistics, if we were given actual statistics on how far down this curve has been flattened, where our targets are, and so on, we wouldn't be acting this way. We'd be acting in a much better way because we'd be treated like adults. And a specific example of this, the most clear example of this, was when this was so-called sold to us, meaning when we all agreed, oh crap, this is really serious, I guess I can't go to work tomorrow, which for California was March 19th at about 8 p.m., when that happened, we all agreed because it was all unknown and it was sold to us. And that's the only term for it. It was sold to us, meaning don't resist, because if you resist, there's nothing we can do about it. Really, there's nothing we can do about it. But it was sold to us as 2 weeks to flatten the curve. You remember that ancient saying?
I remember the President of the United States repeating that many times.
Yes, and not just the President of the United States, every government official in the country was repeating that every single time. 2 weeks to flatten the curve. In other words, let's slow it down so we don't overextend our hospitals. Now, that was the goal. The goal was successful. It was wildly successful. And sometime during that period, these politicians liked the idea of being able to shut down businesses, tell people what to do, make them wear masks, and basically give all the orders that aristocrats are used to giving. And then we find that no, now the goal is no longer flatten the curve in 2 weeks. Now the goal is stay inside until we tell you you can come out. And I've heard stories about hospitals being empty or nearly empty. I had to go to the hospital last week for a completely unrelated issue. I was the only person in the emergency room. I was in a semi-private room for 2 hours. One person came in with something stuck in his ear, and I saw one person on a gurney coming back and forth to get oxygen or something, but otherwise the hospital was deserted. Now, that means that we have certainly not exceeded our hospital capabilities, or capacity rather, in California or anywhere else for that matter. And now they're pretending that the entire purpose of this thing is, no. We've said from the beginning, you're going to have to climb into your tornado shelter and lock the door for a year. If they'd said that in the beginning, no one would have done it, rightfully so. But this is why people like this man entering the store are in this kind of mood, because they're just sick and tired of being told that they have to go out of business and that they can't go about their lives with no legal authority other than somebody's making a decision based on some public health guy who may have a two-year degree education from a community college. He's basically shutting down the county. And this is not democracy. This is not the republic. And by the way, Scotty, it's not the rule of law either. Laws are passed by legislatures, and legislators are responsible to the people. There are no laws in place here that govern this. And if there were, then I'd feel better about it, number one. And number two, I know what I could do about it. But there aren't any laws. There's just this vague kind of emergency conditions exist. And therefore, to hell with you. I'll tell you when you can come out of your house. And every day, more and more people have decided and come to realize that this is in fact what it is. And the BLM protests were all the evidence you needed ever, that this is not about public health. And they're just sick and tired of it. And we're going to see more of it. And we should see more of it in public. On people's private property, you have no right to tell them what to do, and you have no right to threaten them for simply doing their job and asking that the policies of this private property be respected, or else please leave.
Ladies and gentlemen, the members at BillWhittle.com fund this enterprise. And when they hear me asking questions like this, I'm just grateful they don't have a line item veto. We are grateful for your support.
Yeah, or a clothesline.
And if you are not yet a member at BillWhittle.com and would like to see what goes on behind the scenes, I encourage you to go to that website, click the big green Become a Member button. If you're not ready for that huge step, that major $10 a month commitment in your life, you may just hit that notification bell on YouTube to make sure that you don't miss any of our videos, except, of course, those that are only seen by members. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks for watching.